Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev, where today I put everything I've been learning recently to the test and challenge myself to create a sprite stacking tool. That's right, my goal for today is to build a sprite stacking tool, and we'll only be focusing on the most basic of features because, this is all just for fun. And if all goes well, at the end of this session we will have a working sprite stacking editor of some sort. That sounds like a plan, so let's not waste any more time and get to the coding. Now first up, let's take a look at our HUD/workspace for this project. On the right hand side, we have a small group of color swatches, which I'll admit would have been a lot less tedious to code had I just went with some sliders. Anyway, below the swatches is where our quote-unquote model will be displayed. It'll rotate and reflect in real time what's being drawn in the main center area. On the left hand side, we have our layer list and buttons to clear all layers and add a new one. The layer list is interactable, including a delete function via the right X. The middle area will be where we draw each sprite layer, which includes a helpful little grid that can be toggled on and off. Now, before we get into any code, let's go over how I plan to build our editor. Now, if you're not familiar with a sprite stack, it's a visual technique that achieves the appearance of a 3D model by literally stacking sprites on top of one another. It's often a tedious and not very optimal task, but its growing popularity has spawned quite a few programs specifically meant to help ease the creation process. To which I looked at and thought to myself, yeah, I could build that. Maybe. And so this is how we'll do it. Our layer data will be contained in DS grids. So each grid cell will equate to 1 pixel of our sprite. And for simplicity's sake, we're going with 10 by 10 by 10 for our dimensions. Each cell will hold 2 pieces of data, display state and pixel color, and these will be stored in a nested array. The grids will then be contained in a DS list, which will act as our layer controller. We will then draw all that stored data in the preview area using a loop to quote-unquote stack the data as if it were an actual sprite stack. So, with that, here's a quick preview under the hood. The main area takes the current layer's grid and displays that data via blank sprites and a simple loop. Next, here's a look at the right side of the HUD, which currently doesn't contain anything too crazy. I should also note that this entire thing is built in one object and clickable areas are all done through hotspots. So for the left side of the HUD, a left click will either display a layer's grid, delete that layer, clear all layer data, or execute the add layer script. The add layer script itself simply adds a new entry and empty DS grid to the DS list. And for the right side of the HUD, the only interactivity needed were the swatches, which pulls data from its own DS grid containing our color codes. And now for the main event. We need 2 variables to keep track of the mouse's position within the main area. Then some basic math was used to simplify the mouse's position to match the main area grid. Indeed, it may have been overkill to have so many different variables to keep track of so many variations of the mouse's position, but I wasn't about to take any unnecessary risks. Anyway, the grid math was working out properly, so now it was time to make this an actual editor. Back in the code, a check for the current grid was made. That check was then used to determine what the left click would do. If the cell is already marked, then that cell is unmarked. If the cell is unmarked, then that cell's data is changed to marked, and the current color is stored in the second value of the cell's grid's nested array. And boom, just like that, our editor was done. Cells would switch when clicked on, either adding or removing color to our current grid layer. And just to make sure this was actually working properly, multiple layers were added and drawn on, all of which displayed properly as I cycled through and even deleted some entries from the list. So with the editor working, we now had to convert that data into an actual preview. First thing up was a loop that would go through our entire list of layers. Next were a few variables for preview size, how far to distance each layer, and the current list position in the loop. After that came a huge chunk of math, which I actually had to put some extra research time into outside of game development to understand. Basically, this is the math equivalent to lengthers in GameMaker, with the added benefit of providing a universal central point. All of this ridiculous math would then be passed on to the drawn sprite, with the grid data determining the display state of the pixel and the color of that pixel. And boy oh boy, the results were beautiful. Layer upon layer of stacked sprites would begin to appear in the preview area as I drew them in the main area. However, as I started adding more and more to the layers, I realized that the stack was actually being drawn upside down. Luckily, the fix was as simple as changing the orientation of the stack. So outside of my center no longer being, well, centered, our preview area now displayed the layers in the proper order and now right side up. And quite frankly, I was blown away to see that this didn't end up in catastrophic failure. The only thing I came into this knowing would work was that huge chunk of math for the preview display. But to see it go from a ridiculous idea to an actual thing, and an actual thing that works, that's pretty awesome. Now obviously, this is not a very robust piece of software, but with some tweaking, I could definitely make this an actual viable tool. But there are already so many out there that already exist that do this, but do it even better. Also, I currently have no idea how I would export the stacks. File creation is just something I haven't really looked into, other than, to create save files for options and basic data. But if I had to guess, I don't know, draw the layers in sequence to a surface and export that as an image somehow? I don't know. Perhaps we will revisit this one day when I finally get to file creation. For now, however, that brings us to the end of this challenge and this episode of Let's Dev. So leave a like if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already, and leave your thoughts on this little challenge in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.